Every Friday night, Julia's job is to compare the grocery prices of our neighborhood stores for Saturday morning shopping.
March 17, 1961, Leipzig, East Germany. The apartment building at Eisenbahnstrasse 42 sits dark except for one third-floor window. Heinz Mueller, 34, factory worker at the WWII Kombinat typewriter plant, hunches over a homemade antenna constructed from coat hangers and copper wire. His wife Greta stands behind him, one hand covering their daughter's mouth to keep the 8-year-old quiet. The television set, a clunky Rembrandt model purchased with 6 months of savings, flickers with static. Then, through the snow and interference, an image materializes. Not the familiar gray tones of Deutscher Fernsehfunk, the state broadcaster. Something else, something impossible. A West German program, ARD's evening magazine. The camera pans through a supermarket in Kaufhalle, a medium-sized city just across the border in West Germany. Mueller counts under his breath. 5 aisles visible in one shot, shelves stacked floor to ceiling with products, canned goods in varieties he cannot name, fresh produce piled in colorful pyramids, meat displayed behind glass counters abundant and glistening. A woman pushes a cart overflowing with groceries, selecting items casually, as if choosing were a minor inconvenience rather than a strategic operation requiring hours of queuing. Mueller's hand trembles. He has been told his entire adult life that this is propaganda. Potemkin villages filmed on Hollywood sets. Capitalist lies designed to demoralize the socialist working class. But the image looks real. The people look real. The casual abundance looks horrifyingly, undeniably real. What Mueller didn't know was that within months, thousands of East German families would be constructing similar antennas, orienting them westward, risking Stasi informants and official disapproval to glimpse what existed just kilometers away behind the Iron Curtain. What he couldn't have imagined was that this flickering image would do more to undermine the German Democratic Republic than any CIA propaganda operation ever could. Within 3 decades, the government he trusted to tell him the truth would collapse, not from Western military pressure, but from the simple, devastating power of comparison shopping broadcast at 625 lines of resolution. The irony was that East Germany's leaders had built the antenna infrastructure themselves. Throughout the 1950s, as television technology expanded across both Germanies, transmitters rose on both sides of the border. The Federal Republic of Germany constructed powerful broadcast towers designed to reach their citizens. But electromagnetic waves respect no political boundaries. The signals spilled eastward into Thuringia, Saxony, and Brandenburg. By the early 1960s, West German television reached approximately 60% of East German households. By the 1980s, that figure would climb to nearly 90%, leaving only the Dresden region in what became grimly known as the Tal der Ahnungslosen, the Valley of the Clueless, cut off by geographic barriers from Western broadcasts. The Socialist Unity Party leadership recognized the threat immediately. In 1952, Otto Grotewohl, the East German Prime Minister, declared that West German television represented NATO's most dangerous weapon. He was more correct than he knew. The Stasi, East Germany's sprawling secret police apparatus, launched Operation Blitz Contra in 1958, attempting to jam Western television signals with powerful interference transmitters. The effort consumed millions of marks and accomplished virtually nothing. The jamming equipment proved crude, ineffective, and easily circumvented by repositioning antennas. By 1960, the operation was quietly abandoned. The signals continued flowing. What the East German authorities couldn't jam? They attempted to demonize. State media warned citizens that watching Western television was an act of ideological sabotage. Teachers questioned children about their parents' viewing habits. Factory committees held educational sessions explaining that West German abundance was achieved through exploitation of the Third World. The programming itself, authorities insisted, depicted only the wealthy elite, not the suffering masses of unemployed West Germans living in poverty. But Mueller and millions like him were not watching news programs or political debates. They were watching something far more dangerous: advertising and lifestyle programming. Commercials for Persil laundry detergent. Cooking shows featuring ingredients they had never seen. Game shows where ordinary workers won consumer goods as prizes. Most devastating of all, they were watching programs that casually, almost accidentally, revealed the everyday reality of West German life. A drama series set in Munich might feature a scene where a character stopped at a grocery store after work. The 5-minute scene incidental to the plot would showcase what to East German eyes looked like impossible abundance. Werner Krauss, an electrical engineer from Erfurt, later recalled his reaction to seeing his first West German advertisement in 1963. They were selling different brands of coffee, not just one type. They had 5 different companies competing to sell you coffee. I remember thinking, what kind of insanity is this? Why would you need 5 coffee companies? Then I realized we had been waiting 3 weeks for coffee to arrive at our coffee, any brand. And these people were choosing between 5 options like it was a difficult decision. The technical specifications of the television systems themselves revealed the divide. East Germany broadcast on the Techem standard, later switching to PAL, the same system used in West Germany. This compatibility was both blessing and curse for East German authorities. It meant their citizens needed no special equipment to receive Western signals. A standard television set, properly oriented, could pull in programs from Hesse or Bavaria. The state's own television service, Deutscher Fernsehfunk, operated 2 channels by 1969. DFF-1 focused on news and political programming. DFF-2 offered entertainment, carefully curated to present socialist values. Both channels operated with annual budgets that would have funded perhaps 3 weeks of ARD programming in the West. The quality difference was stark. East German television cameras, manufactured at the WWII Pennicon plant in Dresden, produced functional but inferior images. Western broadcasts, transmitted at higher power with better equipment, often looked sharper than domestic programming on East German sets. The psychological impact of seeing your own state's programs look worse than the enemy's cannot be overstated. It suggested, without words, that perhaps other claims about socialist superiority might similarly fail to match reality. But it was the grocery stores that struck with particular force. Food occupied a central place in East German consciousness. The ration system had ended in 1958, but shortages remained endemic. Butter, real coffee, citrus fruits, and quality meat appeared sporadically. East Germans developed elaborate strategies for shopping. Women, who bore the burden of household management, would spot a queue forming and join it before knowing what was being sold, reasoning that any queue meant something worth buying had arrived. The verb to organize took on special meaning, referring to the informal networks and connections required to obtain basic goods. The contrast with West German shopping could not have been sharper. Inge Hoffmann, a nurse from Potsdam, described watching a West German housewife on a cooking show in 1972. She was making a fairly simple meal, nothing fancy, but she just pulled item after item from her refrigerator. Fresh vegetables, different types of cheese, real butter. She wasn't showing off. This was just her kitchen. I sat there counting the items in her refrigerator and stopped at 20. We owned a refrigerator too by then. It usually contained perhaps 5 items. Seeing her casual abundance felt like being mocked. The East German state attempted to compete. The regime invested heavily in the Kaufhalle system, the state-run grocery stores. By 1970, East Germany operated over 17,000 retail food outlets, serving a population of 17 million. The mathematics suggested adequate distribution. The reality suggested otherwise. The stores often sat partially empty. When shipments arrived, word spread through informal networks, and queues formed rapidly. Shoppers developed the habit of carrying a string bag at all times, the famous Einkaufsnetz, just in case they encountered something worth buying. What East Germans couldn't have imagined was that their government knew exactly how wide the gap had grown. Stasi reports from the 1970s, declassified after reunification, show that the secret police conducted extensive surveillance of public attitudes toward West German television. One report from 1975 noted that 87% of surveyed citizens in Karl-Marx-Stadt regularly watched Western programming. Another report from 1978 documented that workers routinely discussed West German advertisements during factory breaks. The Stasi understood that the ideological battle was being lost one television program at a time. The government responded with a curious combination of repression and accommodation. Open discussion of Western television remained dangerous. Citizens learned to speak carefully, to express appropriate skepticism about what they saw, to maintain the fiction that they watched only for amusement, not because they found it more credible than domestic programming. Simultaneously, East German television attempted to compete by loosening some content restrictions. Entertainment programming improved. A detective series, Polizeireff 110, debuted in 1971, directly competing with West Germany's popular Tater crime show. East German productions could never match Western budgets or production values, but they demonstrated that the state recognized it was in a battle for viewers' attention. The intershops represented the state's most damning admission of failure. These special retail outlets, established in 1962 and expanded throughout the 1970s, sold Western goods for Western currency. East Germans with access to Deutsche Marks, usually sent by relatives in the West, could purchase items unavailable in normal stores. Coffee, chocolate, quality alcohol, cosmetics, electronics. The intershops stocked precisely the products East Germans saw advertised on West German television. The store's very existence confirmed what state propaganda denied: Western goods were superior. Western abundance was real, and the East German economy could not compete. Klaus Dietrich, a Stasi officer stationed in East Berlin during the 1980s, later reflected on the contradiction. "We spent millions surveilling people who watched Western television. We filed reports. We tried to identify ringleaders, though what would that even mean? Everyone was watching. Meanwhile, our own government operated stores that sold the exact products we were supposedly telling people to reject. The cognitive dissonance was extraordinary. We were enforcing a lie that our own policies contradicted. The Westpaket, the packages sent by West German relatives, provided physical confirmation of televised abundance. Throughout the Cold War, West Germans mailed packages to their Eastern relatives, carefully packed with coffee, chocolate, clothing, and household goods. The packages represented both kindness and, whether intentionally or not, a powerful form of propaganda. An East German family might doubt their own eyes when watching television. But when a package arrived containing the exact products they had seen advertised, when they could hold a bar of Milka chocolate or a jar of Chibo coffee, doubt became impossible. The state regulated these packages carefully. Customs officials inspected each one, ostensibly checking for contraband, actually assessing the flow of Western goods into the country. Limits were imposed on package size and frequency. The regulations changed often, seemingly arbitrarily, designed to frustrate but not eliminate the traffic. The government understood that many families depended on Westpaket to supplement inadequate East German supplies. Banning them entirely risked popular anger. Allowing them freely meant admitting economic failure. The authorities chose an uncomfortable middle ground, permitting packages while maintaining the fiction that they were unnecessary luxuries. By the 1980s, the phenomenon of West German television viewing had become so normalized that it barely constituted rebellion anymore. Teenagers grew up with Western pop music programs. Families scheduled their evenings around Western shows. Certain programs achieved near-universal viewership. The Eurovision Song Contest, broadcast across Europe, became an annual event where East Germans could compare their nation against Western countries in a harmless competition. Even state officials watched, though few admitted it publicly. The Dresden region remained the exception. The Tal der Ahnungslosen, cut off by the Ore Mountains from Western transmitters, could not receive West German signals. The population's dependence on East German television alone created a noticeable difference in attitudes. Dresden residents, according to Stasi reports, showed higher levels of satisfaction with the state. They were more likely to believe official pronouncements. They expressed less interest in Western goods. The correlation was obvious and deeply troubling for the regime. Where Western television signals reached, loyalty to socialism weakened. Where signals were blocked, the state's narrative held stronger. What the Dresden exception demonstrated was that television's power came not from sophisticated propaganda, but from simple visibility. West German programs were not trying to convert East Germans to capitalism. They were simply showing West German life. The persuasion happened passively, through accumulated observation, and East German watching Western television for years absorbed thousands of casual details. How West Germans dressed, how their homes looked, what they ate, how they shopped. The lifestyle differences built up like sediment, creating an undeniable conclusion the West was wealthier and ordinary citizens lived better. The numbers told the story. In 1988, West Germany operated approximately 37,500 food retail outlets for a population of 62 million. Those stores carried an average of 12,000 distinct products. A typical West German supermarket in a town of 30,000 people might stock 8,000 different items across multiple competing stores. East Germany's 17,000 Kaufhallen serves 17 million people and typically stocked between 800 and 1,200 products. The variety gap was an order of magnitude. An East German could walk into their local store and choose between perhaps 3 types of cheese. A West German could choose between 40. Television programs made these comparisons unavoidable. A West German news segment covering a strike at a grocery chain would casually show the store's interiors. A travel program about German wine country would feature stops at village markets overflowing with local produce. A comedy sketch set in a supermarket would reveal the sheer variety available to ordinary citizens. None of this was designed as propaganda. It was simply life broadcast without particular agenda. That ordinariness made it devastating. Margot Fisher, a teacher from Halle, described the psychological experience of watching Western television in the 1980s. You developed a strange double consciousness. You lived your life in East Germany, you went to work, you shopped, you raised children. That was your reality. But simultaneously, you were aware of this other Germany existing just kilometers away, where everything worked differently and you couldn't deny it, worked better. It created a permanent sense of frustration. Not political anger exactly, more like the feeling of being stuck in the slow lane while watching traffic speed past. The Stasi's attempts to counter Western television grew increasingly desperate and absurd. In the 1980s, the secret police experimented with creating fake technical problems that disrupted Western signals during major broadcasts. Transmitters would mysteriously malfunction when important news programs aired. The disruptions fooled no one and simply angered viewers. Other operations involved more subtle approaches. Stasi agents would spread rumors about West German programming, suggesting that certain shows were scripted propaganda or that Western prosperity was artificially maintained through debt. These rumors gained little traction. East Germans had grown sophisticated at distinguishing propaganda from reality, and what they saw on Western television looked far more authentic than what they were told by their own government. The political leadership's internal discussions, preserved in archives, reveal awareness of the impossible situation. Erich Honecker, who led East Germany from 1971 to 1989, received regular reports on television's impact. A 1984 memo to the Politburo noted that Western television had become the primary source of information about current events for the majority of citizens. Another report from 1987 warned that young people were adopting Western fashion and musical tastes directly from television programs. The recommendations were always the same: improve East German programming, provide more consumer goods, demonstrate socialism's superiority through results rather than rhetoric. But the economic constraints that made these recommendations impossible were the same constraints that made Western television so damaging in the first place. The revolution came not with violence, but with movement. November 9, 1989. The Berlin Wall opened within hours. East Germans flooded across the border, not primarily to emigrate, but to confirm with their own eyes what they had watched on television for decades. The West German government had prepared for this moment. Every East German citizen received 100 Deutsche Marks of Begrüßungsgeld, welcome money, upon crossing the border. The intent was humanitarian, helping visitors afford basic needs during their trip. The effect was to enable the most devastating confirmation possible. East Germans went shopping, they walked into West German supermarkets, and simply looked. Some filled carts, marveling at the ability to choose freely. Others just wandered the aisles, touching products, reading labels, counting varieties. The experience overwhelmed many. Television had prepared them intellectually, but not emotionally, for the sheer abundance. A supermarket in a small West German town might stock 30 varieties of jam, 20 types of bread, 50 different cheeses. East Germans stood in aisles and cried, not from joy, from grief. From the sudden understanding of how much they had been denied, how many years had been lost living with artificial scarcity while abundance existed just across a border. Harold Schmidt, who crossed from East Berlin into West Berlin on November 12, 1989, later described his first shopping experience. I had seen it on television 1,000 times, but standing there, it was different. I was 41 years old. I had spent my entire adult life living with shortages, organizing, queuing, making do. And here was a store, just an ordinary store in an ordinary neighborhood, and it had everything. I picked up a can of coffee, just a normal can of coffee, and there were 8 more brands next to it. I started laughing, and then I started crying, and I couldn't explain which emotion was stronger. The grocery stores destroyed the legitimacy of the East German state more effectively than any political argument could have. Citizens had been told that shortages were temporary, that the West's abundance came at the cost of exploitation, that socialism would eventually overtake capitalism. Television had cast doubt on these claims. Physical experience shattered them completely. Within months, the East German government collapsed. Within a year, reunification talks began. The state's inability to provide even a fraction of the consumer choice available in the West made every other claim it had made seem equally hollow. The Dresden phenomenon became clear in retrospect. Citizens from the Tal der Ahnungslosen, without years of Western television exposure, experienced more acute shock when they finally saw West German stores. They had believed state propaganda more completely because they lacked the comparative framework that Western television provided. Their disillusionment was sharper, their anger at having been deceived more intense. The regime had been accidentally correct. Television was NATO's most dangerous weapon. But it wasn't the political programming or news coverage. It was the cooking shows, the advertisements, the casual glimpses of ordinary life that slowly, surely eroded belief in socialism's promises. The technical specifications that made this possible seem quaint now. 625-line PAL broadcasts, VHF and UHF transmitters, antenna arrays that pulled in signals from 50 kilometers away. The technology was simple, almost primitive, but it proved sufficient to transmit the one thing that authoritarian systems cannot survive: direct comparison. East Germans didn't need sophisticated analysis to understand their situation. They just needed to see how other people lived. Kurt Walden, an engineer who worked on East German television infrastructure, reflected on the period in a 1995 interview. "We built the system that undermined us. Every transmitter we constructed, every antenna array we installed, it all made Western signals easier to receive. The irony never escaped me. We were literally building the infrastructure of our own ideological defeat. And we couldn't stop, because East Germans expected to have television denying them that would have caused its own problems. So we built the system and they pointed their antennas west, and we all pretended not to notice." The Kaufhalle versus supermarket comparison became a symbol of the Cold War's ultimate conclusion. Not military strength or ideological superiority, but the simple question of whether a government could provide its citizens with adequate grocery options. East Germany possessed nuclear weapons, a sophisticated intelligence apparatus, a million-man military. None of it mattered when measured against empty shelves and limited choice. The state could build tanks but couldn't stock bananas consistently. That failure, broadcast into millions of homes every evening, proved fatal. The legacy extends beyond Germany. Throughout the Eastern Bloc, television signals crossed borders. Poles watched Italian programming. Czechoslovaks received Austrian broadcasts. Hungarians could see Yugoslav television. Each instance created the same dynamic: citizens of socialist states comparing their reality against their neighbors. The comparisons rarely favored socialism. Information wanted to be free, but in this case, it didn't need to be particularly free. It just needed to be visible. By 2019, 30 years after the wall fell, historians had access to thousands of pages of declassified documents. Stasi files, government reports, internal party discussions. The documents revealed that East German authorities understood they were losing the propaganda war as early as 1970. A report from that year noted that West German television had become the primary source of information and entertainment for the population. The report recommended improving East German programming and increasing consumer goods availability. Neither recommendation was fully implemented. The economic constraints were too severe. The system couldn't compete. Heinz Mueller, the factory worker who risked official disapproval to watch Western television in 1961, lived to see reunification. He was 62 when the wall fell. In interviews conducted in 1992, he reflected on those early days of illicit viewing. "I thought I was seeing propaganda, elaborate fakery designed to make us doubt our system. It took years to accept that it was real. Even then, part of me couldn't believe that such abundance was normal for ordinary people. When I finally walked into a West German supermarket myself in November 1989, my first thought was that they had dressed it up for us. The visitors made it extra nice. Then I realized, no, this is just how it is. This is how it had been the whole time. We had been living in scarcity while they lived in abundance, and the only thing separating us was politics and a wall." The supermarkets still stand, of course. The ones East Germans first visited in 1989 have been renovated, updated, expanded. They stock even more variety now than they did then. Former East Germany has modern retail infrastructure, though gaps in wealth and development remain decades later. But the people who lived through that period carry the memory, the shock of abundance, the grief of recognition, the understanding that came from finally seeing with their own eyes what television had shown them all along. Television didn't cause the Cold War's end. Economic failure, political calcification, and the accumulated weight of authoritarian control all played their parts. But television made the failure visible. It provided context. It enabled comparison. And in the end, comparison proved fatal to a system that required isolation to maintain legitimacy. The grocery stores, with their abundance of choice, flickering on screens throughout East Germany every evening for 3 decades, represented not propaganda, but simple truth. And truth, transmitted at 625 lines of resolution, proved more powerful than any weapon the West could have deployed.